All right, thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our virtual town hall meeting. My name is David Olson. I'm an assistant city manager here at City of Temple. We have with us our three candidates, three finalists for the police chief position here this evening. And we're going to have a kind of a two-part event as we move through the evening. The first part, we'll have some questions that we've collected over the last week from feedback we've received from the community. We've got about 11 questions we're going to try to get through, and we'll ask those questions, give everyone a couple of minutes to respond to each question and give us their thoughts on that topic. And then from there, we're going to move into more of a one-on-one session. And during that one-on-one session, we'll have a single candidate in. We'll allow you to use the raise your hand feature in the meeting bar. And with that raise your hand feature, then we can unmute your mic and allow you to ask questions that we may not have covered during that event. Our first portion, we're going to limit to as close to an hour as we can. And then the second portion, we're going to try to limit to about 10 to 15 minutes with each candidate after that. So that being said, we will get started. And we had lottery drawing of who gets to go first. And Mr. Lopez, Chief Lopez, drew that straw, and we'll start with him. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of give us a little background, and then if you could specifically talk about what skills you believe make you a great candidate and a great fit for Temple's next police chief.
All right, good evening. First of all, thank you for hosting this event, and thank you for everybody in the internet to view this and ask us questions. It's my pleasure to do this. First of all, let me clear the elephant in the room. As you can tell due to my accent, I'm not a native Texan. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, but I've been living in Houston for the past 33 years. My experience is I was active duty Army from 1984 to 1987. And when I got out of active duty, I moved to Houston, and where I worked for the prison system for 3 years. And then I worked for the sheriff's department for about 9 months before I got hired on with the Houston Police Department. In the Houston Police Department, I held several positions on leadership, and I worked investigations, I worked administration, and patrol. Patrol is the backbone of the department, so I spent a lot of time there. And during that position, well, really in all my positions in investigations, administration, and patrol, I was able to interact with the community, and that's where I think it's most important. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
If you could please highlight those reasons why you think you would be a great fit for Temple's next police chief.
Overall, I believe that all my experiences, my military experience, I had a 27-year career in logistics and planning and leadership. So I have a lot of experience in planning and networking throughout the United States. I was responsible for 5 brigades stationed in New Jersey, Alabama, California, Chicago, and here in Houston. And I was able to successfully manage those divisions and those brigades. In addition to HPD, I worked, like I said, I have experience in administration, working in internal affairs, working in investigations, going after corrupt cops. I worked the special task force for the FBI to identify and investigate corrupt government officials, to include police officers. I have a lot of experience in investigations when I spent 14 years in narcotics. So overall, with my professional experience and my personal experience, I believe I'm a good candidate for this position. I believe in education. That's why I finished, obtained my master's degree. I attended FBI National Academy, and I'm scheduled to go to SMIP, the Senior Management Institute for Police Officers, hopefully this summer, depending on the pandemic that's going on. That's subject to change. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Reynolds, same question for you.
Thank everybody, including James and Pedro, for joining us tonight, embracing the technology as we move through this unusual time in our history. So a little bit about me. I joined the Navy right out of high school. I spent 6 years in the Navy with a fast attack submarine on the West Coast. I started off in nuclear engineering, but ultimately ended up being a radioman, handling ship to shore, ship to satellite communications. When I exited the military, my wife had one request, and that one request was that I could do any job that I wanted to, but I couldn't be a police officer. And as much as I tried to respect her wishes, after a while of being unemployed and working small jobs, she just said, please get a job with some benefits. And I applied for law enforcement. I ended up working for the Leavenworth Police Department, which is right next to Fort Leavenworth, approximately 40,000 residents when I worked there, and to learn the basic skills of law enforcement. After starting my family and realizing that more opportunities existed at the Olathe Police Department, I was able and fortunate and blessed to be hired by the Olathe Police Department. The Olathe Police Department is about 143,000 now. We cover 65 square miles. It's a full service city home rule. We provide almost every service that citizens need. I too went back to college, both during my rise through the ranks at the Olathe Police Department, completing a bachelor's degree in management and human relations and a master's degree in organizational administration with an emphasis in leadership. I have worked in, much like Pete, I've worked in every division bureau, 3 years undercover. I currently supervise and manage a multi-jurisdictional team, the officer-involved shooting investigation team, working multiple officer-involved shootings, not with my jurisdiction, but outside jurisdictions. Why I feel I'm a good fit for this particular vacancy, it really struck me when I read the brochure. It's truly a values-based organization with a mission focus, and they're data-driven. They have a lot of things that are working out for them. They have applied those values to the organization. A lot of things are good in Temple. A lot of things are moving forward. As well as my strong desire with a heavy emphasis in community policing. I believe it's crucial and vital for police organizations to be involved in community policing. Not only includes me, but it should permeate all the way through the organization. That's why I feel like I'm a good fit. I'm really drawn to the area. I'm very excited to be here and honored to be a part of this distinguished panel. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief Reynolds. And Chief Lowry, if you could please discuss, same topic, just discuss a little bit about yourself and then let us know why you think you're a good fit.
So I'm a military brat. My father was in the military, 4 years in the Marines, 18 in the Air Force. My first 8 years of my life, I lived over in the Philippines and Germany. Then we moved to Florida. I've had great exposure to different cultures. We moved to Hawaii, graduated high school in Honolulu, Hawaii. I applied in Arlington in 1983 on my 21st birthday is when I was hired. I joined law enforcement to make a difference. I stayed in law enforcement because I really enjoy and continue to make a difference. Moved up through the ranks in Arlington, and as my peers, I also went back to college and achieved my bachelor's and a master's degree. Through my operational and administrative experience throughout all of the different assignments that I've had, I believe it's given me a great aspect and perspective on where I look at the growth plan and the 5-year plan for Temple, as in for achieving a CALEA accreditation. I've written many policies. We are a Triarch facility, accredited facility in Arlington agency. I also look at it on a personal level. That's why Temple is a great fit. Is, you know, I have a 8-year-old daughter. We have a 30-year-old daughter with a grandson. We were lucky and blessed to adopt a child several years back. We got her when she was 14. I think Temple is a great growth potential. It's a community it's a thriving community, great schools, affordable housing, job security. So for all those personal reasons, and then I also have on my wife's side, we have family that lives in Burnett and south of here, moves us a lot closer. And I believe that it's the opportunity is just perfect for me, for an agency like this to take an agency that has a great foundation into an opportunity to build upon that and move them forward through my experience and help them achieve and move to another level and becoming an exemplary department.
All right, thank you very much. Our next question, we will start with Mr. Reynolds. If you could please discuss what your strategy is for recruiting officers to the Temple Police Force.
You broke up there. Could you repeat the question?
Can you discuss your philosophy and your thoughts on how you recruit great officers to the Temple Police Force?
Yes, absolutely. So many agencies and organizations went through perhaps a downturn in applicants a few years back. Some of the things that we've done at our agency is to include some incentives for signing on. But I think in Temple, you have a unique perspective here with Fort Hood being so close. And I believe there's about 3,600 military folks that are exiting the military each and every year. So that should be a good recruiting ground for us as well. I also believe that you've got really good folks right here in the community that we need to be reaching out to and recruiting, developing those folks on the front end. And that occurs very early on. That can occur in the schools with some of the community outreach events that we do. There's lots of people in this community of great diversity that would be great officers on the department. We just have to figure out how to relate to them and communicate and converse with them and educate them and see if they're interested in becoming a police officer. I truly believe that police agencies need to be representative of the communities that they work and live in as best that can be done. And there's a lot of unique talent here in this area, with the Temple College being here, with the young population, with it being one of the top 100 places for folks to live for young families. There's a lot of great opportunities here to recruit right here, as well as the combination with Fort Hood. There's also a great metroplex around here. So there's a unique opportunity to get out to some of the recruiting fairs and the opportunities to go visit colleges and high schools and talk to them early on. One of the things that we have at my agency is an Explorer program, which serves as a really great tool for navigating folks in high school or junior high, feeding that interest. And in one of our high schools, we actually have what's called the 21st Century Program, and it's designed specifically for police, fire, and EMS. So all those students are progressing their way through high school, completing their general education assignments, but they're also gaining knowledge and experience in fire service, police service, or EMS service. So those all provide great training grounds for folks to get in to law enforcement.
Thank you. And Mr. Lowry, could you please describe your philosophy on recruiting and any additional thoughts you may have?
So in recruiting, I believe a lot of it has to do with the culture of the department and the reputation of the department, because you want to recruit those that have the same foundation that you believe that make you a professional department. You should be recruiting heavily to ensure that your community diversity breakup is also made up in your organization. Without a doubt, law enforcement needs to be respectful and reflective of the community that they serve. So in Arlington, as we talk about, and Mr. Reynolds talked about, is we call it a hometown recruiting. We started a program working with a school district where you have a police and a fire academy. But in addition to what we've done is we've worked with UTA, the University of Texas at Arlington, and the Tarrant County Community College. So in their junior and senior year, they participate in these programs. They're getting dual credit for college credit, so they can graduate college with up to 30 hours worth of college credit. And then if they want to go on for their 4-year degree, UTA has agreed and bought into the program that says they're automatically accepted if they were part of the hometown recruiting. Furthermore, if they are a graduate from UTA and they were a participant in the hometown recruiting, we guarantee them an interview to become a police officer if they wish to join the Arlington Police Department. But you have to be proactive. You have to be mission specific as when you're looking for recruiting. And the recruiting aspect of it is more than just recruiting somebody, but then how do you retain them? Your attrition is something that's really impacting law enforcement. A lot of officers now with the new generation, Z, X, and the millennials, you know, they do 4 or 5 years and then they're through with that challenge and they're moving on. So how do we work through that so we can retain those employees that we've invested in, that we've spent time to recruit, so that we can keep that culture that we're looking for and the professionalism and the level of service. So, you know, building upon training, treating them with respect, you know, we want to make sure we treat them so well that they don't want to leave and that they're capable of leaving, but they don't leave because we do treat them so well in the manner that we treat them, because our greatest asset is our employees.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Lopez, could you offer your thoughts on recruiting?
Oh, yes, I agree with everything Sean and James said. But before I give my answer, I forgot to say something in the beginning, that my wife is going to kill me. I've been married for 35 years, and she wanted to make sure I say that. But when it comes to recruiting, you know, it's a nationwide problem with a lot of agencies trying to recruit qualified personnel. A lot of agencies have antiquated rules and procedures when it comes to adolescent behaviors. Like, for example, when I was in high school and I got into a little fight with another student, the principal took care of it. But nowadays, police officers are called to the scene and have to make a report. So whether you're arrested or not, there's a record of some type of criminal activity. So when the applicant comes to apply for the department, most likely they're going to get disqualified from proceeding on this procedure. Another issue is adolescent behavior when it comes to marijuana use. You know, this is 2020, and most kids, young adults, have tried marijuana. And a lot of agencies, that's automatic disqualifier. So the department and the community has to look at what criteria we need to exclude and not exclude, and expand that pool. We also need to include people that have actual work experience. A lot of agencies require 5 years with one job. Well, a lot of, like James said, a lot of millennials, Generation X, whatever you call them now, they jump from job to job, so they can't build that that work experience. So recently with HPD, we expanded the applicant pool, and we didn't weaken it. We just expanded it to allow work experience to count. So that's increased our applicant pool in the police department. So that's what we need to focus on, increasing the applicant pool by taking a hard look at our entrance criteria. And also agree with everything James and Sean said. Good points.
Thank you. Our next question will start with Mr. Lowry. And if you could, please tell us what you would consider to be the greatest challenge you faced in your career, and how do you feel you overcame that challenge?
So there are many examples. The one I would provide to you is to show you for your character is I had promoted to the rank of sergeant, and at the time, Chief Bowman instituted a policy that required you to have a 4-year degree to even apply or to be promoted. So the challenge for me was working full time and going back to school to achieve my degree. So I was able to go back and obtain my bachelor's degree. And I determined at that time, while I was involved in it, school had changed so much and I was back in the groove, I needed to finish and obtain my master's degree. By doing that, it opened up many different doors for me and opportunities to allow me to promote to the rank of lieutenant to deputy chief. And because of that, I was then able to be selected, have the opportunity to go to the National FBI Academy, go to SMIP, and that broadened my experience even further by having building a rapport with professional peers. And that experience, getting the education enhanced with my work experience, is something that was difficult to do.
Thank you. And Mr. Lopez, could you please describe your what you view to be your greatest challenge and how you overcame that challenge?
My greatest challenge is, throughout life, you have personal challenges, you have professional challenges. Professionally is trying to achieve a certain rank. And in order to do that, a lot of departments have limited opportunities. I'm fortunate to have a great department with a lot of mentors. So you have to seek out the type of mentor that's willing to help you out, especially when it comes to cultural diversities within the departments. You need to have people in key positions who are willing to reach down and lend a hand to bring you up. So with that, I have several mentors in the department, and I'm not going to mention the names, so I don't want to embarrass them. But when I decided to promote in year 17, there wasn't a lot of emphasis in having Latino leaders in the department. So when we had these organizations that come forward in the community, from LULAC to the NAACP to other unions, we have an African American union, we have the Hispanic union in the department. They gave you opportunities, and they sent you to classes in order to perfect your testing skills and perfect your assessment skills. In addition to that, you have to latch on to somebody who's willing to help you out. And like I said, I'm fortunate to have several mentors in the department. And since that experience, has taught me how to be a mentor to other officers and lieutenants. So far in my career, I'm over the promotional process in the police department, and I've mentored over 60 sergeants and lieutenants who successfully promoted to the next rank. So I believe mentorship, seeking the right mentor and taking the right steps to advance yourself professionally is a big deal for me.
Thank you. And Mr. Reynolds, what would you view to be your greatest challenge, and how would you describe your steps to overcome that challenge?
So I think the greatest challenge we face in law enforcement is maintaining the high standards that we expect out of officers and employees that come in. I believe we should hire for character. James mentioned that a little bit ago. So if we hire for character, no matter where you come from and what your background is, we should believe then that we can give you the content, which is the training that goes into maintaining that higher standard. And sadly, disappointingly, unfortunately, many times folks that get into this profession over time lose their way, make poor choices, don't maintain the nobility of policing, don't consider it a privilege and an honor to wear the badge and the uniform. And they end up making mistakes that are significant that require them to no longer be employed in law enforcement. Over the course of my career, sadly, I've had to part ways with folks that I considered better police officers than I were, better interviewers, better detectives, because they lost their way. And some of them were friends of mine, people that I considered to be friends of mine, that couldn't maintain the high standards that law enforcement has. And it's really difficult, and often a time to be very reflective on what did we miss as an organization? Was there something in the background that we could have identified? Or were these just poor choices as somebody made their way and navigated through their career? So for me, the biggest challenge has been to maintain that standard. I got over it as we worked our way through that. We must hold each other and ourselves accountable, because that's how we maintain the public's trust. If they don't believe we will police ourselves, there are plenty of folks out there who want to come and police us. So we have to maintain our good accountability in-house. Good quality training, hire for character, give them good conduct and content, and mentor them, as Pedro said, along the way, so that they continue to make good choices and represent the highest honors and traditions of law enforcement.
All right, thank you. Our next question, we will start with Mr. Lopez. If you could, and to preface that, all of our finalists come from cities that are larger to some extent than Temple, Texas. So the next question is, how does your knowledge in working for larger cities transition into a smaller city like Temple? And if you could, please discuss the types of policies that you feel would be similar to those that you would have here in Temple, Texas, and those policies that you expect would be different in a smaller city.
That's a long question, but
Yes, it is.
Could you repeat the first part again so I could make sure I focus?
So the question is, how do you feel that your knowledge base in working in a larger city will transition to a smaller city? And then the second part is, what types of policies and procedures do you feel would be the same and different?
Okay. Well, policing is the same from large agency to small agency. You know, the biggest thing with policing nowadays is creating a relationship with the department, and that's one thing I want to focus on, because of the issues that happened late last year. I believe that currently I'm a chief over 5 patrol divisions in the gang division, and I make every effort to attend community meetings. All my commanders have community meetings once a month with their constituents, with their neighborhoods, homeowner associations, and all the citizens. And I try to make it a point to reach out and attend those meetings so I can be known. But due to the volume of meetings that occur on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, I'm not able to really interact with the citizens as much as I want to. I show up, stay there for 15 minutes, then I have to move on to the next meeting. I'm looking forward, if I'm selected, to work in small agencies so I can devote more time to the community. I'll be able to go out and attend events and spend more than 5 to 10 minutes as I do with the Houston Police Department. So that's one thing I like about the position here in Temple. And what's the part 2 of the question?
Just what types of policies and procedures do you feel would be the same, and what do you feel would be different in a larger city versus a smaller city?
I think policies and procedures, you know, a lot of agencies go through CALEA accreditation. That's something that we want to explore here in Temple. And that accreditation gives you basically the blueprint for what policies and procedures should be followed. Issues that I want to correct and I want to look into is how the community, what policies we have to allow the community to interact with us. Like, for example, I like to establish a criminal justice advisory board to have community members input into our training curriculum. That's something that we have in Houston that I'm not sure we have here. I believe we have an employee representative council committee that allows employees, classified and civilians, to air their issues, and then we follow them to make sure that they're taken care of. I like to establish a peer support program. I think there's one here, but I want to expand it to include military reintegration programs. I understand, I don't know the percentage of officers here in Temple that are military, but we have a large percentage in Houston. In the last 20 years, we had officers deploy, and when they come back, there's no follow-up to make sure they're doing okay mentally and they don't have any issues that could, come to unnecessary use of force. So those are the type of policies and programs that I want to implement here within Temple if I'm fortunate enough to be selected.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Reynolds, could you discuss what type of transition you feel you would have coming from Olathe to Temple, Texas, with the difference in population, and then any policies and procedures you feel would be similar or different?
Can't hear him.
I think you're muted. Let me see.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. So I don't think there would be a huge transition. Olathe has 143,000 population. We cover 65 square miles. That's one of the things I really enjoy about actually a decrease in the population. I love interacting with citizens. I love being able to communicate with the various groups. I think that's a huge benefit to a law enforcement agency of having those community connections. I think that's one of my strengths, is the ability to build strong relationships, really based on the servant leadership model. I exist to serve the citizens of this community. That means I've got to be present, I've got to be listening, I've got to be empathetic. The things that we do we hold the community conversations with our command staff multiple times a year. We do one for the adult citizens, and we do a youth summit as well, where we get to hear their concerns and what's going on in the population. And those are really good ways to take a deep dive into community concerns and perceptions that exist. With CALEA certification, Temple is a Lexipol agency, which is a Gordon Graham product that came from the West Coast. Olathe is a Lexipol agency. I believe many of the policies are similar. I do believe that Pedro hit on a lot of good things with peer support, with the military reintegration, with an overarching wellness theme. We have to treat our employees differently than perhaps how we were all raised in this industry and profession. It was 10 or 15 years in before somebody really asked me, hey, how are you doing? And they meant it. We expose folks to incredible tragedy, incredible trauma, and we can't just expect them to move on to the next thing. If they're hurting emotionally, physically, mentally, or spiritually, they're going to be challenged in meeting the expectations for the citizens that they run into next. But I also believe you have to take a look at your use of force policy, make sure that it's covered well in de-escalation techniques, all of your high-risk policies, dealing with the mental health, folks that suffer from mental illness and have mental health issues, your pursuit policy. You have to take a hard look at those high-risk policies that in many instances can place the public in harm's way. I think all policies with a new chief should get a fresh set of eyes and a review. But I don't believe there's going to be much of a challenge based on you guys Temple being a Lexipol agency and us as well. Those are really well thought out policies structured off federal law, case law at the state level, and also at the local level, district cases when applicable. I look forward to the opportunity, and much like Pedro, if I'm selected, I really look forward with engaging with this community. There's a lot of good going on in Temple, and I'm excited about the opportunity.
All right, thank you very much. And Mr. Lowry, could you please discuss your thoughts on how your experience in Arlington compares to a smaller town like Temple, and different policies and procedures?
Temple has a very good foundation, and I would tell you that as for a rule, the difference, in my opinion, humble opinion, from a larger agency to a smaller agency is the frequency of the calls. So you just have a little bit more experience and frequency and significant or critical calls. I believe the policies are going to be fairly similar. I know y'all are best practices. You're looking to achieve CALEA accreditation. We're a Triarch accredited agency. The other part of that is that my experience with writing policy for giving you guidance and for use of force, hate crimes, to give guidance in that as you do a deep dive review, as Mr. Reynolds says, you should look at all your policies. You should never accept the fact that once you write a policy, it's good. It always needs to be in a consistent review to ensure that you're on the best track. I would also tell you that I believe the fact that Arlington was picked as one of 15 agencies to be a role model for the 21st century policing and the 6 pillars also has prepared me to help give further guidance to build upon those 6 pillars, as many of the topics have been talked about, from building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, down to your 6th pillar for officer wellness and safety. Those are all significant issues that we need to be looking at. And I know this department has gone through a lot in the last 4 to 5 months. I'm hoping that if I am honored and would be selected in this capacity as a chief, also is to build, the new chief coming in, regardless of who it is, needs to also be a healer for this department and the community for what they're experiencing, and making sure we're taking care of the employees and the community. The key aspect to me and what I've learned in law enforcement from day one is that law enforcement is a service profession. And if you don't realize that it's customer service based, you're in the wrong profession. And, the philosophy that you should be following, we've learned it all the way back from Sir Pill, and the fact that community-based policing, the police officers are part of the community and the community are part of the police department. And when you separate that is when you start having issues with trust and accountability. And that's why you get into issues with consent decrees and the fact that you have trust issues. You need to have relationships. It's relational. You need to build relationships with that community-based policing philosophy, meeting people. I really enjoy getting out and meeting the community members, talking to them, and getting a pulse on how we are doing. And sometimes the perception versus reality aspect gives you a different insight into that. So you really have to work on building those relationships. I really don't see much issue with moving from a larger agency to an agency like Temple. I think they have a very strong foundation, and there are opportunities that we can even make them accelerate more.
All right, thank you very much. The next question is going to start with Mr. Reynolds. If you could, please tell us, what is your experience either serving as or supervising resource officers?
Was that school resource officers?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I currently serve as the Deputy Chief of Police. I supervise 13 SROs that we currently have in our school district. I realize that it's a bit unique here. There are 4 school districts that serve Temple students: Temple ISD, Belton, Troy, and Academy. We have a similar geographic boundary issues where our neighboring city to the south is partially covered in our city, one to the north. So very similar with that. We work very closely. We have a very strong working relationship with our school district. We have a solid MOU for the contract for our SROs. We've worked together to work on juvenile justice reforms that were required by Senate Bill 367, which was legislation that sought to change really the pipeline of kids, as Pedro had mentioned, going to school, getting in the system, and you just start that cycle. So we've developed alternative ways to address juvenile justice issues in the state of Kansas, largely because the legislation made some significant steps to change the way we were doing business in the state of Kansas. So the SROs, what we had structured was we were prepared to bring on 3 new SROs over the course of the summer. As you might imagine, the pandemic and COVID-19 has really altered some of those plans that we had. Ultimately, we wanted to get back to a place where every high school had an SRO and every middle school had an SRO. Currently, there are none in the elementary schools. And currently, we have 1 SRO that monitors or that manages 2 different schools. The relationship is really unique. That it develops into relationships that go beyond the SRO role. So if we can win the hearts and minds of kids when they're students and carry that through to adulthood, We're creating just a good community policing model where folks want to interact with the police because they're used to interacting with the police in a positive way. Many of our SROs end up being hired by the school district or end up volunteering their time to coach sports, coach football, coach wrestling. They have backgrounds in those. They really enjoy it, and it creates a unique bond and relationship with those SROs. When we have to rotate SROs out of those, it's really challenging because of the relationship that they've developed with those kids, with the administrators. It's really a great partnership. We partner with our school district on a variety of manners, but the SRO program is one of the fundamental changes in law enforcement that I think has really altered how we do work in the schools and with the juvenile population. It's a fabulous program.
Thank you. Mr. Lowry, could you please discuss your experience with either serving as a school resource officer or supervising school resource officers?
So my experience with SROs began a little over 20 years ago as a DARE officer. I was a sergeant, managed to supervise the DARE unit, and then we combined our DARE unit with the SROs, and today it has expanded where we have 30 SROs and 3 sergeants in the unit full time. You know, the incident really brought home the importance of an SRO was Columbine, and that also was a day for law enforcement to get a black eye. At the time, officers believed that a shooting, and they did what their training told them to do, was they surrounded the location and waited for SWAT. We have learned now that that is not a SWAT call, that is an active shooter, and they needed to respond quickly. Back in 20 years ago, after that incident, I was instituted our lockdown and procedures, come up with a protocol that's still in place today. Now, with that, we have given more extensive training to our SROs. They have to be capable of reacting to these incidents. They also have to be very sensitive because of the youth that's involved in the aspect of the pipeline to prison. We certainly need to make sure be role models for them, because the fact is that when a child makes a mistake, they need to understand there are consequences that could stop them from getting the job, that's been mentioned earlier, later down the road. So being a role model, helping them make decisions. I've been involved in them for at least 8 years. I've helped do their planning. I looked at this year, I was asked to look at their planning again because of my experience through SWAT to make sure their lockdown drills and procedures were in place. Working with them, I critique the schools when they do a lockdown drill. I gave training to every year when I was a sergeant in the SRO and the DARE program. Every beginning of the school year, we'd bring in every single principal from the high schools to the elementary and middle schools, and we'd provide them training so they understood the importance of the SRO. I worked through the contracts with the school district. We work on the 9/12 part of the salary part. Now, obviously with the COVID-19, it's bringing some new conversations about how you're going to do that, but we're still working through that. So I think I have a very broad experience in writing policy and actually working in the schools with the school district.
Thank you. And Mr. Lopez, if you could please discuss your thoughts on school resource officer experience with or experience working with school districts in policing.
Sure. Unfortunately, in the Houston Police Department, we don't have any school resource officers because in the Houston metropolitan area, we have over 24 independent school districts that handle the schools. But we do partner with them on a daily basis with Houston ISD, Independent School Districts, the biggest one. And as the former commander over the gang division and now the current assistant chief of the gang division, we instituted policies to prevent like gang classes. Gang inductions. So we have the GREAT program. It's a good program that the gang division operates, and they go to the schools and they teach middle-aged students how to prevent being a gang member and teach them life skills. In addition, we also participate in a lot of community events with our youth base, besides the Police Explorers, and we have a program called TAPS, Teen Police Service Academy. And that in Houston, we have a large gang problem. So we have a lot of juvenile crime with serious crime, felony crimes. And we try to go into the high schools to mentor and teach our kids on life skills. So that's a program that we spend a lot of time doing. And that's something that I like to do here in Temple, even though the curriculum is set differently. Temple, I understand, doesn't have a huge gang problem, but they have issues with juvenile delinquency. So I would instruct my team to come up with a curriculum with the community to address and teach life skills to our children, in the middle school age and the high school age. So that's a program that I would like to institute here in the Temple area.
All right, thank you very much. That was actually a great segue into our next question. The next question surrounds your strategies on policing juvenile delinquencies. Particularly, citizens have requested for your thoughts on things like auto theft and robbery involving juveniles, and what kinds of strategies you can use to prevent and head those off before they become a bigger problem. So, Mr. Lowry, you're first on this one.
David, can you repeat that question one time? You were breaking up there. I'm sorry.
You bet. So we have a question that's come from a few citizens actually in our submittal process, and it involves juveniles that are involved in auto thefts and robberies. And then just, can you discuss your thoughts on policing juvenile delinquency and how to make sure that folks are set on the right path and we prevent some of those major crimes from happening down the road?
Yes, sir. So, we must invest in our youth. Our youth is our future. Without a doubt, you have to have successful programs and coaching and mentoring, getting to them before they make those bad decisions. We have a program in Arlington called Coach 5-0. I actually have adopted one of the high schools, and then I take a couple officers with us where we actually show up and their practices. It started with the boys football, but now we've moved into the girls volleyball, basketball, baseball. We show up on their events. We're there as a resource for them. At first, when you show up, you got to break the ice and you get into the fact of why are you there? We can't trust you. And you build that trust, you build that relationship where you're allowed to be there and model them the importance of decision making, risk taking, why you don't want to get on the wrong side, because it is an impact for you down the road. Now, for juvenile issues for auto theft, I would tell you it would surprise me if Temple was not experiencing what I think is going across the nation right now for vehicle burglaries. Vehicle burglaries, I would tell you probably 85% of motor vehicle burglaries occur because the vehicle's unlocked. And then probably 10 to 15% of them actually have a weapon in there. So what can we do not only to educate our youth about decision making, but our community members also about what they can do to help prevent these crimes? I'm not particularly in favor of a law for juveniles and truancy, and the fact of late laws for the time zone, and the fact that most juvenile crime occurs during the day. That's what you'll find out. You're better off using resources and your efforts to come up with programs to interact and get them back on track before they even get into the justice system. I think it's important that we invest that time and effort to build those relationships and ensure there's resources available for our juveniles and our youth, whether it's sports activities, anything from a band, if they want to get into a band, what type of recreational facilities do you have in the city? But again, we've got to get away from this pipeline mentality. If you don't hold people accountable for their actions when they make a egregious act, then you're going to have problems. But there are times that we all make mistakes, and we need to be able to move forward and help them do that. But you have to invest in our youth.
Thank you. And Mr. Lopez, same question to you. Can you discuss your strategies on policing juvenile crimes, and then particularly thoughts on auto theft, auto burglary, and such?
James hit stole all my talking points. Thank you. But I'd like to add that juvenile delinquency is not a law enforcement issue. It's a community issue. And we need to partner with the schools, with the parents, with the private sector in order to create programs to engage our youth. We need to create opportunities for our kids after school programs. We need to expand that. I understand that the Temple Most of the students in school districts, they're 72%, 76% poverty level. So that indicates to me that we need to somehow, as a team with the community, with the law enforcement officers and with private sector, to come up with some type of programs, like James said, basketball after school, something that'll occupy their time so they won't, commit these crimes. I'm surprised that there's not a spike in juvenile crime now with the pandemic, with all the kids just at the house and they're bored. So kids are going to be kids. When the police get into it, it's kind of a little bit too late to when they get reported of a crime. We have to take action, do something about it. I also propose that we work with the courts to try to come up with a juvenile justice court. I'm not sure they have one here in Bell County, but that's another approach we could get. Intervention, early intervention, is the best way to approach juvenile delinquency programs. And we need to have that conversation with everybody involved. Like I said, it's not just the responsibility of the Temple Police Department, it's a community responsibility to make sure our youth are engaged in productive activities so they can become on to be better adults. I agree with our police officers, and I want to explore every opportunity where we be mentors to them. And it doesn't matter if they choose to become police officers or not. I just want them to be productive citizens and do something good with their lives and avoid the criminal justice system and the cycle that comes with it.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds, do you have anything else you can offer to elaborate on that subject?
I do. Yeah, I agree with James. Prevention's a big part of this, and we're fairly comfortable as a society that things are fairly safe, and we leave purses and computers and iPads and weapons in vehicles, and there's several educational programs that exist, Hide It, Lock It, Lose It, different programs where the police can be involved in actually educating the public on the benefits of taking their property out of there. Most of the Temple's 91 vehicle thefts, I believe 74 have been recovered, and they've been just recovered on the other side of town. So kids are using this as a mode of transportation to get from one side of town to the other. I believe in many instances it's boredom, it's peer selection, it's wanting to get on the other side of town. There are a variety of aspects that you could include, as Pedro mentioned, working with the courts to develop programs, youth courts. I believe Bell County does have one. Perhaps we create a different offshoot for that. But really the key is getting to them before they have committed these felony crimes, these serious crimes, or perhaps they have an accident with a gun. I just recently worked a case in my hometown where folks went out, 3 juveniles went out, grabbed a gun, and one of the juveniles actually accidentally shoots and kills the other juvenile. So there are real repercussions to these crimes of boredom and nuisance that we need to tack on. Much like Pedro mentioned, having some programs that exist for older juvenile adults that can get them programmed in early into activities that occupy their time and keep them busy. Perhaps it's time to look at a police athletic league for the city of Temple, or some opportunities to open up some gyms and get some coaches and police officers in there, members of the community and volunteers to work with these juveniles. Not only is that a win for them as juveniles, but perhaps that also takes a little bit of the burden and the stress and strain off of those individual families that are trying to do their best while they navigate a tough economy and perhaps are working multiple jobs. One of the things that we've got to realize is that many of these juveniles, I'm one of them, I grew up in a fatherless home. And that's a problem when you don't have a role model or a mentor in your life that can guide you on the right path. Fortunately, I had my grandfather who got plugged in very early on, who straightened me up right away and brought me up right. But we need to be looking at opportunities to assist and help in the prevention of these crimes from occurring, because once they commit one of these felony serious crimes, it's with them forever. And there's also some real potential for tragedies that exist if they get into these cars with guns, or sadly somebody's kid, or so anything that we can do to prevent the pipeline, as Jim stated, I think are really beneficial conversations. And Pedro's absolutely right. It's not necessarily a police issue. This is a community issue, and we certainly need to hear from the community on any other ideas that they might have.
All right, thank you all. Great answers, great discussion. We've got time, it looks like, for about 2 more questions. So our next question that we'll move into is for starting with Mr. Lopez. Can you please discuss your thoughts on how to get Temple police officers more involved and more visible in the community they serve?
I strongly believe that we need to get away from the warrior mindset and transition to the guardian mindset. What I mean by that is that traditionally, police departments, when they do performance evaluations on their officers, they evaluate them based on the arrests, the number of reports they write, the number of traffic stops they completed. There's no emphasis on engaging the community. How many community contacts you had? How many community meetings did you attend? How many citizens did you help? And that culture needs to be implemented from the top, beginning with the chief. So I propose that we, instead of evaluating the common stuff that we do, like the traffic stops and the what you call it, the enforcement activity, we need to really evaluate them on citizen contacts. So we need to make time for them to during the uncommitted time to engage the community. I'm gonna require all sergeants and corporals, I believe the corporal rank is proper here, to know their business owners in their district. If they ride District 1 on whatever shift, on the days or nights, they need to know who the business owners are. They need to have their personal information, so in case something happens, that business owner could contact them directly. Because a lot of complaints we get in the police department is some citizens calling in for minor issues. If they have a way to contact the supervisor in charge of that district, they could alleviate a lot of problems. So we need to make time for our officers during the uncommitted time to engage the community and hold them accountable. When we have new officers coming to the department, I like to assign them for at least 30 to 60 days to a district, and the way that they slowly work on community issues. That way they get to know how to do problem-solving policing, and that'll help out with the community engagement, and that gains the trust of the community when they see the officers out there. I love it when you see a citizen talking to an officer just in a regular conversation, not talking about anything, but just talking to the officer. That builds a lot of trust in the community, and we need to do that. I think Temple has the opportunity to do it because I don't believe the cost of service reports are that huge, and they do have uncommitted time. So we got to just place supervisor emphasis on it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lopez. And Mr. Reynolds, can you discuss your thoughts on getting officers involved and visible within the community?
Yeah, it really is much of what Pedro said. One of the worst things that happened with community policing or with policing in general was the invention of the patrol vehicle, because officers can stay within the cabin compartment. It's temperature regulated, but it also creates issues with non-traditional, non-enforcement contacts with the public. Temple is really unique as they get ready to build from 8 districts to 10, and you have the opportunity of a downtown district, and neighborhood and community policing models in all those districts need to be enacted. Much like Pedro said, we should highlight and celebrate the non-enforcement type contacts that we have with the public. Not only is that good community policing, but it's also a great way to build relationships with those folks in the community who, if they build a positive relation with law enforcement, they're more likely to call us. And we absolutely we need their assistance. Law enforcement can't be everywhere all the time. We need good citizens and good people that have good relationships with us to step up when crimes are committed, to call us when they see suspicious activity. And that's really built off a relationship with the community. And it starts with the frontline officers that have to be out there in the field. Contact sheets that get loaded into a database within dispatch, like Pedro said, so that we have a contact should something happen at the business. And just opportunities for us to engage with the community. I would need a little more information. Is it primarily residential, or is it business, or is it a good combination of both? It's been my experience that officers generally, without proper guidance and supervision, will generally stay on the frequently traveled roads because that's the places where they can get the most contacts. They can perhaps write the most citations, or they're familiar with drug trafficking or other activity that goes on in there. But to that point, folks need to know that we're in those areas overnight. We're out there as guardians of the democracy, just like Pedro talked about, protecting and serving the citizens while they go about their normal business. And we need to do a better job of that in law enforcement. We have that as one of our metrics and one of our measures on a perception survey that we do, so that we can always kind of monitor that. If it's, I don't see police in my neighborhoods enough, then we discuss it, highlight it, put a focus on that. If it's in the residential areas, the same way. So there's some great opportunities there for some community connections. And I love the fact that there's a bicycle patrol unit. That's a great way to do business in the downtown area. Foot patrols are a great way, but we really need to encourage officers several times a day in business districts, get out and get out in their neighborhoods and talk to people. We encourage our folks to stop. If you see kids playing basketball, ask if you can join them in a game. Get out, throw the ball with them. Those are just great, positive, non-enforcement type contacts that really go a long way in the community.
Thank you. And Mr. Lowry, could you please discuss your thoughts on getting Temple police officers engaged in the community and visible in the community?
Yes, sir. I believe you have to have a strong reinvigoration and a clear understanding, and it starts from the top, from the chief down, of what is community-based policing and what are the expectations. I believe law enforcement is the citizens of the United States with all their law enforcement agencies are renegotiating the social contract they have with law enforcement agencies. And it's because there are a few agencies who don't have the trust because of a lack of accountability. I think you can demonstrate by invigorating and building a culture of community-based policing what it truly is meant to be through procedural justice and the pillars of 21st century policing, demonstrate to officers not only can they still have fun, get out and do their job, make the arrest when they need to, but more importantly is build those relationships, because they need the power we gain every single day is from the community that we serve. They're the ones who are telling us what to do, what their expectations are. And when you don't have those relationships, it's when you have that lack of communication and you begin to have the separation where there is no communication and then there is no trust. They don't believe there's accountability. So you have to be actively involved. It's just like Mr. Reynolds, if I may, I'm sorry, Sean and Pete were telling you, is you have to build these relationships. Get your people out involved and let them know this is what we expect you to do. Let it be modeled, celebrate, post those activities of the behavior you're looking for and celebrate it, showing this is what we're talking about. And it's more than just talking about your police officers and the police department. The police department is made up of commission and non-commission. We expect the same thing from our professional staff to understand what community policing is all about. It is customer service. You have to be engaged with your citizens and those that you come in contact. Remember, what occurs in any town USA when it's a negative story has an impact on Temple Police Department. What happens in Temple, whether it's on the south side, north side, whether it's a patrol officer or a sergeant or somebody at the front desk and somebody in records or a civilian that gives them bad information or bad service, that story is going to be told tenfold and has a negative impact on this agency. So it's important that you ingrain that culture and why you do that. And I think you can demonstrate to your officers by building this culture. In Arlington, when I was on the South District as a patrol deputy chief, I just hammered in the aspect of procedural justice. And one year we had 17 formal complaints on our officers. The next year, we only had 5, a 75% reduction in formal complaints. We still reduced our crime. They were still making arrests that were necessary, but the relationships were improving. We maintained that for the next year. Officers were having fun, less complaints. They weren't getting in fights, weren't getting injured, but you show them, look at what you can do. You give that sense of urgency to them and show them what you can do by practicing these philosophies. And you make yourself a better, not only a person, but a better agency.
All right, thank you very much. So we've got time in this portion of our town hall event for one more question. We're going to start with Mr. Reynolds, and this one's kind of a good one to end on. It's a little bit of a tough question, but if you could tell us, in your opinion, what do you perceive to be the biggest challenge facing law enforcement in our nation? And then how could you take steps to make positive ground on that issue right here in Temple, Texas?
I think the biggest challenge that we face in law enforcement is dealing with perhaps the incredible amount of negative reporting that on law enforcement. Some of it well-deserved, but I think that's a real challenge. It impacts morale inside police departments. And it doesn't mean that it's always not warranted or needed, but that's a significant challenge that we face. Recruiting is a big challenge as well. Maintaining good quality folks of good character who want to get into this profession. It's really stressful to be the focus of so many negative stories that occur nationwide. That's a big challenge for us in law enforcement. How I think we get over it in Temple or in any police organization is it all starts with many of the topics that we've talked about. We have to change the relationship that we have with the community. Law enforcement hasn't always done a good job of explaining or educating the public on why we do what we do or why a use of force is the way it is. We don't talk about de-escalation enough with the public. We don't reiterate those concepts. So I think there's a number of opportunities that exist to reinvigorate, as James mentioned, the relationship that exists. And it starts with non-traditional enforcement or non-enforcement activities, getting out there, being a friend and a neighbor to the folks that we work with. The police are the public and the public are the police. We couldn't do this job without the community. We absolutely need their support. And we also need them to come alongside of us and support us in what we're doing and trying to accomplish. Those efforts will go a long way. You'll see a reinvigoration of folks that continue to want to serve. And I'm always, it lifts my spirit when we have good quality candidates come into law enforcement that want to continue to serve the public. In all honesty, they're not paid enough. Their schedules are challenging. They miss a lot of opportunities with families, but they do it because they have a heart for service. And I believe, honestly, if we focus on three things that really we need to focus on: service, customer service. We're in the customer service business. That's what we do. Justice, and then fundamental fairness. We can change the relationship that currently exists out there in the world. And I believe Temple has a great deal of support from the community, but there's always avenues and areas where we can improve to increase that relationship, to come alongside of one another, to work with one another, to improve one another, because law enforcement can't solve all the issues that exist in our current world. We absolutely have to have great community partners, school districts, mental health industries, volunteers in the communities, neighborhood watch. We absolutely have to, there has to be a firm foundation in the relationship for us to be successful dealing with any of the challenges that we face. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Reynolds. And Mr. Lowry, if you could discuss your thoughts on biggest challenge facing law enforcement in our nation and what steps you believe we can take to better that issue.
You know, there are several topics that I think that you can put underneath that. And the first one is what we previously talked about. And the question before was accountability and trust. And I think that's, we talked about this social contract that we have with our community members. There's a lack of trust, and you need to work on, and the way you achieve that, I think, is to concentrate on the 6 pillars of 21st century policing. The first one is building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight. You work down through there where we talked about officer welfare and safety. All of these things are important to work through to make sure that you are addressing this issue, which further goes into the fact that we talk about many times. I think law enforcement as a whole is looked upon as the panacea for many things. There are many social ills that law enforcement is called upon to address that really we should not be involved in. It should be other community resources. We certainly should be assisting because we are community caretakers, but we shouldn't be really addressing. I think an officer just despises the fact when they get a call for an MHMR, mentally disturbed person, and it's the 5th time they've been out there in 4 months and they can't get that person help because they know what's going to happen down the road is eventually they may have to use force against that person. They don't want to do that. We are not able, and we should not be held accountable for providing the resources to properly service that person that's in need, that is suffering from a mental crisis. We need to depend upon other resources out there. And I think the other issue is our recruitment and retaining of qualified personnel. So again, for me, the 3 topics I think that we're facing in law enforcement is the accountability and trust issue, which you can resolve through 21st century policing, working on those pillars. The second one is social ills, and I used MHMR, but we're going to have to be, it's a holistic, multidisciplinary aspect. And the one area that we really haven't talked about is faith-based. The faith-based community in Temple has got to be involved, from our youth to major critical incidents to providing services and a resource to our officers that see critical things. You know, officers see more critical incidents in their career in 5 years than the average person sees in their entire life. And it does have a toll on there. And the third item I talked about, and we talked about early on addressing, is for recruiting and retaining personnel. I think those are the three bigger issues that I see, although there can certainly be more.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Lopez, can you address your thoughts on the same question?
Those are all great points, but I believe the biggest issue is throughout the nation is the lack of trust in the community of law enforcement in general, because we have a history of corruption in law enforcement and of bad acts, especially nowadays when we have everybody has a cell phone, so every little act of use of force, officer involved shooting, is captured and put on the internet. In order to overcome that, we as an agency, as a law enforcement profession, we have to become more transparent, and we have to include the community in those three areas that we talked about. We need to include them in training. The community has the right to dictate how their officers need to behave and what they need to be trained on. I'm a big advocate for deconfliction training, because I noticed in the plan that we had for the public safety building, we had funds allocated for a simulations house, a shoot house, which is great. We need to teach our officers to shoot and shoot accurately. But we also need to spend some time and spend some resources de-escalation training. So I'd rather see a virtual reality simulator built into that public safety center. We need to include our citizens into our recruiting process and allow them to sit on the board, on a committee, that when we reject the applicant has the right to appeal, and let the citizens decide whether we need to keep this applicant or not. We need to have that conversation of having a criminal justice review board on critical incidents like use of force or officers involved in the shooting. Those citizens should have a say on not final discipline recommendations, but they should be allowed to make recommendations to chief of police in order to feel better and have more trust in the community. Like I said, transparency is a big issue. And the biggest thing is that our society nowadays is internet based. Nobody wants to go to the library and go pull out a book and look at our SOPs. All our procedures and policies should be online, but not the tactical issues that we have. With those officer safety issues, we can't put our tactics online, but we need to put all our SOPs online and let the public have access to them. Because when a citizen requests a policy through open records, we have to give it to them. And who stops them, or what stops them from posting that policy online? And we go ahead and take the first step and put everything online in front of everybody so they can review it and make comments. That'd be a great issue in solving the trust issue.
All right, thank you. We're going to pause for a second here. This will conclude the first portion of our virtual town hall. But before we take any break, I want to take a moment to kind of recognize the uniqueness of the situation we're in. I can say personally, for me, this is the first virtual town hall that I've done. And I know that over the last several weeks, we've had a lot of firsts in the virtual world. So just wanted to take a second to thank our candidates that joined us for this town hall event. And it can be a difficult situation to be in, where you're talking to a computer screen instead of being able to see all these people in front of you and have those casual conversations one-on-one that we would normally have. So we appreciate your willingness to participate in this process, and we're thrilled that you're here in Temple to go through our interview process. I want to take a second to thank all the staff that worked very hard on putting this event together. We appreciate the last minute kind of crunch time efforts that have gone into making sure that this goes off without issue. So thank you to the staff here as well. And it's very interesting, very cool to be able to look and see a list of names over. We've had several attendees here, and we see folks not only right here in Temple, but folks from around the state and in some cases around the country watching this Temple PD interview event right here live. So we appreciate everyone for making that happen. And if you join this webinar via the website and you entered your email address to join the webinar, you should receive a link for a survey that you can fill your thoughts on all candidates out through that link, and that will be emailed out sometime after we close the event out tonight. And at this time, what we're going to do is move into kind of a one-on-one conversation. We will be using the raise your hand feature in the meeting bar, and with that raise your hand feature, we can then unmute attendees and allow them to ask questions that they have that maybe they want to elaborate a little bit more with each candidate, or if they didn't quite get a question answered that they were really looking to get answered, we'll go that route. So Mr. Lopez will be our first one-on-one candidate, and we'll ask Mr. Lowry and Mr. Reynolds to step into the conference room, and then we'll open it up for questions here shortly. Okay, so it looks like we are ready to move into our one-on-one session here, and we're going to spend about the next 10 minutes or so fielding questions or having any other discussion that that's necessary. It looks like we have an unanswered question from Sandra Vexler. And give me one moment, I'll figure out how we field that question. Okay, so Ms. Vexler wrote into us, and she says, "Good evening, my name is Dr. Sandra Vexler. I'm a child and an adolescent psychiatrist, relatively new to the Temple area. Are there any candidates that are bilingual?" I guess was question one, so I'll let you take that one first, Mr. Lopez.
Can you hear me now? Did you hear my answer?
Did not. Could you?
Okay. Yes, I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish. I can read, write it. I understand it 100%. Speaking wise, I'm about 75% fluent. So yes, I do speak Spanish, and I take, when we do press conferences in Houston, if Chief Acevedo's not there, I'm the one that does the Spanish translation to our media.
All right. And the second part of that question said, separately, what kind of mental health training and police experience have you had personally, and what kind of mental health training would you ensure your officers in the Temple Police Department have to engage our community?
All police officers required by TCO, it's our license, the Texas, I forgot the acronym stand for, but it's the licensing agency for all police officers in Texas. All officers are required to take 2 levels. Well, 1 level is the basic CIT training, which is 8 hours, and then you have the advanced CIT training. In addition, we also encourage my officers to seek outside training. So we have a lot of mental health professionals that come out in the Houston area and train officers. We have a very robust mental health division where we spend a lot of time when we partner with the clinicians to go out to calls which involve CIT personnel. That's something I would like to explore here in Temple, where we could have a clinician, mental health clinician, ride with an officer who has advanced training so they could handle issues. A lot of the issues that we have with mental health is chronic mental health callers, where they call because they have no other choice, but they cost a lot of resources. So they call 911 30, 40 times a month. So it's wasted resources in terms of manpower. So we team up with our mental health division officers and our behavioral scientists, our clinicians, and they go out and take care of the problem for us. So that alleviates the cost of service. That's something I like to explore here in Temple.
All right, it looks like we have another question or two that came in from Thomas Plock. And his first one says that it's frustrating when there's security video or images of crimes that occurred, such as package theft from porches or burglaries. And when given to the police, sometimes it feels like there's a lack of, that they're unable to follow up due to a lack of resources, or the cases go unsolved, and it feels like there's little to no resolution with photographic evidence. Can you discuss any thoughts you have on dealing with those issues?
Yes. Well, as a matter of fact, back in January, we had a very heated discussion where we had a group of businesses in the area that I'm responsible for in the Washington Heights district in Houston, where it's a lot of restaurants were being burglarized. Sometimes they were burglarized 10, 12, 13, 14 times. And our burglary and theft division, unfortunately, they only have about 40 investigators, so they're overwhelmed with the number of cases. But that's no excuse. So we had a very tough meeting, and we made a promise that we have to set priorities. We encourage business owners to submit video evidence. So anytime they have video evidence, we ensure that an officer picks up the video and tags it in the property room. And then a burglary investigator, whether they could work the case or not, they need to follow up with the citizens to let them know, hey, this is the status in this case. Unfortunately, a lot of burglaries that happen go unsolved because of lack of evidence. But when you have video evidence, you can probably try to work leads. So I have to determine to see what size of the investigators we have here in Temple Police Department to determine what can we do. But all cases will be looked at, and citizens will be followed up on whether we can solve the case or not. They're going to be follow up and talk to make sure that their concerns are addressed.
All right, it looks like we have Deborah Lariv that has raised her hand. If Alan or someone, can you unmute her microphone and see if we can let her ask her question?
Hi, I grew up in the Crosby area, so I'm aware of Houston and what it's all about. My question is, here in Temple, we have homeless in the downtown area. What would you do to help the homeless become unhomeless? And also, we have a lot of panhandlers that show up on our corners at our major intersections. What would you do to alleviate the panhandlers on our corners?
Well, thank you for dialing in and answering this question. Good questions. Let me start off with the panhandlers. I have to examine. In Houston, we have very aggressive panhandling ordinances, so I need to examine what city ordinance we have in order to combat the panhandlers. So that I have to look at. When it comes to CIT patients, the homeless people, that's a problem that we need as a department, we need help. It's not a law enforcement issue. It's a community issue, and we need partnerships with mental health professionals, because a lot of our homeless are unfortunately chronic homeless people. They're situational homeless people. They have people that are travelers, and economic factors. Like I'm afraid that due to this COVID-19, that in the next few weeks we're going to see an increase of homeless people, because people don't have money to pay their mortgage, don't have money to pay their bills. So we're going to have to see an influx in homeless people. But being homeless is not a criminal act. So our only solution when you call us is either incarcerate the person for a minor violation, which doesn't work. We can't arrest our way out of this issue. We need a regional approach at the city level, the county level, the state level, and the federal level to help with the homeless issues. And it's a long-term project. It's not going to be done in 30 days. So we need to find ways to help them get identification. A lot of homeless people, they don't have an identification because they're mentally ill. So they can't go to DPS and get their license. They can't go to the VA hospital to get, and if they're veterans, to get any medical benefits. So as a community, we need help from the private sector, the hospitals, and the government in order to address this problem. So like I said, it's a long-term problem that we need help in, and we need to do a better job of training officers and recognizing the chronic homeless and those issues that they have, so they could handle them without resorting to putting them in jail or having an unnecessary use of force.
All right, it looks like we have a question from Eric Palin as well. Eric, are you there?
David?
It's like, okay.
I tried to unmute
All right.
him. Oh, there he goes.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I have kind of a two-part question, if that's okay. First question is, there's been kind of a rise in active shooters around the country, and I know different churches in the areas have been exploring the possibility of having their own armed security teams or armed safety teams. Do you have a plan for how to integrate Temple PD into that, having a way for them to work with churches with that? And then I've got a second question whenever you're ready.
All right. Let me answer this question first before I forget, because I have a short train of thought. So thank you for the question. And yes, I strongly believe in citizens and property owners protecting their property. And in Houston, we have a class that we use. The acronym is CLASC, C-L-A-S-C. I forgot what it stands for, but it basically shows business owners and churches to how to avoid, deny, defend their properties. So that's a class that's taught nationally that I'd like to bring to Temple, so we could share that information with all our business owners, our churches, and anybody that needs to know how to avoid active shooters. Active shooters, we don't know when it's going to happen, but we need to plan properly and to mitigate those if it does happen. So what's your second question?
Second question is, I know since you're from the Houston area, Chief Acevedo has had a prior stance leaning more towards stronger gun laws. And I know since we're a smaller town, that the gun industry is a pretty large representation in this area. Can I get just your opinion on gun control in this area?
Gun control in this area, like I said, I'm a strong proponent of the Second Amendment and people bearing arms, and I want them to be, but we need to have responsible gun laws. I believe that question is better answered by the state and federal officials when it comes to gun control. I definitely support any ideas that prevent harm to the community. I personally don't believe we need to have high capacity magazines on personal firearms. I don't understand that reason, but those issues are better answered by officials other than law enforcement. I do have a position on it. Like I said, I strongly believe in firearms, but we need to be responsible and maybe enforce some. What I hate the most is, like, the other day we had a shooting of a kid who's like 3 years old, for a firearm that's left in the home by his parents, and the kid shot himself in the head. So do we go ahead and prosecute the mom and dad, even though they lost a child, or do we go another way? I strongly believe that we need to have policies and laws in place that enforces the citizens to secure their firearms in their vehicles, in their homes. So those are the two policies that I will advocate for and help citizens and the community push towards that. I also believe that we need to have stronger gun laws when it comes to punishment wise, when we have these individuals out there shooting our citizens and using firearms doing robberies. Those should be a greater enhancement in punishment when they use firearm doing a burglary or doing a robbery or doing an assault. So I do believe in that, but the gun control laws are better handled at the state and the federal level.
All right, we have time we'll do one more question here, Mr. Lopez, and this one may be a feeder question for you. We've got Chief Art Acevedo that says he'd like to ask you a question.
Who's that, Chief Acevedo?
Are you able to unmute there?
He should be on. Chief?
Tell him he could text me.
So it looks like he put it in the comment section here as well. I'll go ahead and read it out. Chief Acevedo says that he would like you to talk a little bit about why you might want to leave your current position with Houston PD for this chief position here at the City of Temple. And he wanted to know more so if you thought your long Army career, the experience that you gained during your long Army career would help in this area.
Oh, definitely. I love the Houston Police Department and I want to stay forever. But like I said, mentioned earlier, Chief Acevedo is one of my mentors and I appreciate everything he's done for me. And I want to be over my own department. He urged me to do it. And now I have the opportunity to do it because I look forward to being a leader. We have a lot of supervisors around law enforcement agencies, but we really need is leaders. And leaders are people who are willing to make the tough decisions when the times are tough. It's easy being a leader when the times are good, but when times are bad, like in Houston, we had that unfortunate shooting last year where narcotics officers shot and killed, executed a false search warrant, shot and killed 2 citizens. And as leaders, we stood up, and I was part of that audit. I was in charge of the audit, and we reported what happened, and we didn't hide anything. And yes, my military experience, like I said, I retired as Chief Officer 3 in logistics, and I was responsible for over 5,000 soldiers spread throughout the United States, in Alabama and California, and New Jersey, and Texas, and that requires a lot of coordination skill. In addition, this opportunity as a leader in the department, as a lieutenant, and as a commander, and as assistant chief, I'm accustomed to handling the administrative issues like budget issues, retention issues, understand operations. So I believe all those experiences, along with my military experience and my professional education, has prepared me for this role. So I really appreciate Chief Acevedo for everything he's done for the department. He urges our assistant chiefs and our commanders to go higher and reach higher. And that's why I really appreciate him. And I know he's going to ask me a question, so that's the answer.
We appreciate you answering questions with us. So at this time, we're going to ask Mr. Reynolds to join us. And Mr. Lopez, you're free to step out at your leisure, and then we'll get Mr. Reynolds back in here and we can go through questions with him.
Hi, everybody.
All right, we can hear you. We're not seeing you just yet.
Says the organizer has stopped my webcam.
Go ahead.
See if we can get that turned back on.
I'm trying to turn it on. I sent a webcam request.
I clicked on that before and then it said, no, Joe, you want me to try it again?
Yes. There you go.
All right.
All right, there we are. So we've got a couple folks with hands raised. We'll jump right into questions, and then if we have a couple of questions that were asked previously too that we may circle back to and let you give your thoughts on as well. So we'll start with Eric Palin. Oh, looks like he lowered his hand. So Lariv also has her hand raised.
Hello, Mr. Reynolds. I have a question about police officers. I'm a graduate student of psychology of LPC. My question is, do you understand the silent signs of PTSD within the police department? How will you handle PTSD with your officers? And will you offer peer support for your officers?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it very much. PTSD, as it was formerly called, are really important issues within law enforcement. So at my current agency, in 2007, I launched a critical incident stress debriefing program. In 2009, I launched the first peer support program. And in 2013, we launched our Bestow program, which is Beyond Survival Towards Olathe Wellness. All three of those programs apply to both civilian and sworn. We have a reintegration program that's been very positive for folks that have been deployed for the military, but it also applies to sensitive positions such as those positions that deal with child pornography on a routine and regular basis, undercover narcotics assignments, or any type of long-term investigations of a sensitive nature. We actually require our officers to go and speak with a psychologist, participate in it, for the direct purpose of offloading the garbage, if you will, of what we pick up in this career. Anyone can request a critical incident stress debriefing. We have a very robust EAP program, an employee assistance program. And many times when folks are struggling, it's not necessarily the first, and it's because they've had a triggering event that takes them back to that. So we also offer EMDI, eye movement disassociation repair, which works for some folks, not all. But yes, I'm fully supportive of PTSI. The trauma, the exposure that these folks voluntarily and willingly are exposed to is something that in law enforcement we haven't always taken care of. I was part of the Pillar 6 in 21st century policing. I was fortunate enough to participate in the officer wellness and safety discussions that occurred. And out of that, my current agency was a finalist in the Destination Zero, which is an officer wellness and safety nationwide award system put on by the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. I am wholly supportive of taking care of our officers in all the dimensions of humanity: emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual, or heart, mind, body. We absolutely need to be doing that. That's one of my primary missions as the police chief, is to make sure I'm taking care of the frontline folks. Thank you for the question.
All right, let's see if do we have any additional questions that have popped up since the previous question there? All right, Mr. Reynolds, we had a question that was asked by Thomas Plock earlier. And let me scroll back to that. We'll work through that. The discussion was surrounding having video evidence, such as a Ring doorbell camera or some other security video, and images of a crime that have occurred, such as theft or other type of burglary. And he indicated that it's frustrating to see a lack of follow-up, or due to a lack of resources, or those cases to go on unsolved for some period of time. Can you talk about ways you may address that issue?
So if I heard you correctly, you kind of broke up. He's got some type of video evidence, but yet there's not any follow-up occurring in reference to his case?
Correct.
I think that's a simple fix. or it should be a simple fix. Call me, call the supervisor there. That should not be a big problem in getting follow-up. Perhaps that can be shared via the media, social media, or via a press release, and somebody will be able to identify that suspect for us. We ought to at least be putting the legwork in. There are enough cases that don't have active leads that when we do have active leads, that should absolutely be a priority for us. And that's regardless of whether it's a person's crime or a property crime. I do believe you have to follow a hierarchy, and those persons crimes should be the highest priority. But there's a reason why we have a violent crime enforcement squad and folks working on those property cases. So that I would encourage you to call in. And if that hasn't worked, then I'm happy to give you my number and you can call me and we'll make sure that that gets taken care of.
We have a question that came in from, let's see, Sandra Vexler has her hand raised. Can we unmute Dr. Vexler so she can ask her question?
She's self-muted right now. There she goes.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for coming to interview for the position here in Temple. So my name is Dr. Vexler. I asked this question previously to Officer Lopez. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. So my first question, unrelated to mental health, is are you bilingual, and or what kind of cross-cultural experience do you have?
So I am not bilingual fully. I do speak some Spanish. I used it much more regularly and routinely when I was on the street. It's definitely a priority for me to get back in the saddle and bring that back up to speed. As far as cross-cultural diversity, I've been through a myriad of training. I was teaching at a multicultural university. There's 86 different languages spoken in the Olathe School District. So a wide variety of experiences in dealing with cultures from all around the world. Were you able to hear me?
I think Dr. Vexler had a call.
Thank you. I think I was muted. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your answer. The second question was in regards to mental health training. So backpacking on Ms. Larive, who just asked a question earlier, but what kind of training do you plan to offer for your officers, and have you had any specialized training with regards to dealing with, mental health patients that you're called to?
Absolutely. We offer both CIT and mental health first aid for law enforcement. In fact, officers at my current agency are actually instructors in mental health first aid. I'll kind of back up just a little bit. I was the chair of the Johnson County Suicide Prevention Coalition for a year as that fledgling organization, which was a collaboration between community members across a wide variety of fields, school counselors, physicians, psychologists, doctors, nurses. And we recognized that suicide and mental health issues they're not a police issue, they're not a family issue, they're not a mental health issue, they really are a community issue. So we were trying to bring the best minds together to work on those issues. In 2010, I believe it was, we saw about a 1,500% increase in our mental health calls for service. And that was everything from bipolar, schizophrenia, and suicide ideation. We recognized, along with the mental health center in our area, that we needed a.
Present.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
That we needed a different mechanism. So we actually wrote a grant, and we were authorized the first mental health co-responder in our area. And what that did was that took a licensed clinical mental health social worker and embedded them in the police department. That had two significant issues for us, two positive impacts from that immediately, is that we were able to reach folks in a time of crisis, proximate to the time of crisis, and provide resources and services, or even a screening and assessment if necessary. And the mental health being embedded with us, took that portion of work. We were there with them, making sure that the scene was safe, that everything was safe to go, but they were able to take that work from traditionally our officers, who would then have to transport somebody to an emergency room and perhaps be there for hours while they tried to navigate this very complex system of if somebody had insurance or if they did not. We've seen such success from that program. Our agency now has 2 of them. The grant has expired, and we actually pay for both of those positions. Not necessarily the best business model. We could probably rework on a cost sharing model for that. But many of the times, the more times we put police officers in contact with folks with significant and serious mental health issues, the more chances we are for a poor outcome. So if we can get folks services at the time that help them navigate the system, and now each agency, there's 18 different law enforcement agencies in Johnson County. Many of them have now their own co-responder, which is really an employee of the mental health center, but there's a cost share between agencies. It's been a significant change in how the industry is operated, one that's very much positive. We go out with them and do follow-up to make sure folks are doing okay, to do welfare checks. They'll do follow-ups now on cases that are completed suicides with the family members, because we know that those family members are perhaps more prone to attempt suicide if another family member has already completed by suicide. It's a really unique collaboration. And in fact, we hosted the first mental health co-responder conference in Olathe, Kansas earlier this year. We signed on early to the IACP's commitment to get our folks CIT training or mental health first aid. We've made significant progress in that and are well on our way to fulfilling that obligation. It's absolutely vital and critical that officers get some training in both of those things, mental health first aid or CIT, because dealing with it many times out on the street. The second thing that's really been helpful about having them embedded in our police agency is that they've been able to educate officers, officers who thought they knew what was going on with the mental health industry and with mental health issues. It's really been helpful in educating our officers and creating a greater awareness and understanding of issues that exist in the community.
So we've got time for just a couple more questions here. It looks like we've already got several queued up. So all I'm going to do is kind of read in a few of these that are rated, and I'll let you answer those in one swoop, and then it'll be time for us to swap out and go to the next candidate. So we have questions from Jeremy Blattell, Terry Teston, and from Lynn Tomlikoff. I believe I said that right. So Lynn's question says that Temple appears to be growing rapidly, has a major interstate running through the center of it. How would you work with city management to ensure that there's an understanding for the needs of the police department? Terry Teston's question surrounded place on employee development. And Jeremy Blattell's question wants to discuss any consideration for changing the current 12-hour shift. I know that's a lot in one bite, so feel free to let me know if you need any refreshers there.
So the first question was, the city's growing rapidly and understanding the needs of the police department specifically, yes?
Correct.
So the things that I think is really important is, in order to get in there, I've got to really listen to what's going on and what the perceptions are inside and what the perceptions are outside. I am absolutely, I believe it's one of my essential responsibilities to pass on the information, to develop plans that prepare Temple's police department for the growth that they're going to experience. It's one of the things I'm most attracted to in Temple, is that there's a lot of really positive things going on. They've got a lot of really good plans. There's a lot of great opportunities, but it certainly is important when you have that growth potential to make sure that we're still meeting the service demands and have the resources in-house in order to accomplish that. So I will very much carry the torch to Mr. Olson and Ms. Myers on any potential future needs. But I do think you have to use the metrics and the data to show what those needs are, as well as just the thoughts and opinions of folks that are within the police department. Employee development. So One of the things that is constantly evolving is employee development. It's a challenge to get officers to all the training that they need to get to. There are some programs that can be developed in-house, leadership development courses, combinations of ethics, constitutional law, de-escalation training. There's opportunities for folks to get certified and come back as a train the trainer. I really think you have to evaluate both the perception inside as well as the community's perceptions, evaluate that with mental health issues and the types of calls that we're going to really forecast what issues are needed. Law enforcement generally focuses on emergency vehicle operations, firearms training, and defensive tactics. All good courses, all essential for a risk management philosophy and things that make us better. But there are also some other courses in ethics and constitutional law that make you grow and develop as a leader. Advanced certification, supervisory training for those folks that get promoted. And I am certain there are some in-house experts inside the Temple Police Department or perhaps the broader city that we could develop those courses together. I've certainly developed a countless number of courses on everything from leadership development to emotional intelligence. So I think employee development is really key. And I think also identifying what an employee wants to do and where they want to go. Is there some opportunities for some career tracking? I want to go to investigations, or I want to eventually be an SRO. Some of those opportunities to help mentor and guide those folks to what they believe they want to get done. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not a fan of the 12-hour shifts. Just from, I know those 12 hours can turn to 14s, but no, if it's working and it's a successful shift, I would not be looking to change it. So I'm just not. At my agency, every officer works 4 10s. They love it. I understand the benefits of 12-hour shifts as well. If I tried to eliminate 4 10s at my current agency, it wouldn't go very well. And I was the one that introduced 4 10s. So just to put it plainly, unless there's some sort of specific need that we would have to evaluate that, if the 12-hour shifts are working and we're able to maintain coverage and provide services to the citizens of Temple, and it works and it's not causing any safety issues, then I am certainly comfortable with it. Did I hit all of them?
You got all of it, and I thank you for your time here. Appreciate your discussion with the community. And just to clarify there for Ms. Tolmachoff, I was told that I pronounced the last name incorrectly, so my apologies, but we got to clear it up pretty quick. At this time, we're going to ask Mr. Reynolds to step out, and we'll have Mr. Lowry in for our final one-on-one with the candidate.
Thank you all so very much for your time. I appreciate the time that it takes to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Lowry, you should have a webcam request to start your webcam. There you go. Thank you.
All right, it looks like we have video and we have audio. Deborah Lariv has raised her hand, so we'll start with that question.
Hi, Mr. Lowry. And I appreciate your wanting to have diverse community within the police department because that addresses Temple's diverse community. In Temple, we are a community that believes in communing with our police chief and our fellow officers. And we do coffee with a cop on a regular basis. And we also have a big to-do about National Night Out. What are your thoughts about continuing coffee with a cop more regularly than we do now? And what are your thoughts about National Night Out?
Well, first with coffee on the cop, I certainly think it should continue. You can do breakfast for business, but the coffee on the cop is the opportunity for, if you work with the concept of community-based policing, for your officers and the command staff that work that particular area to meet with community members. Anytime you have an opportunity to meet with your community members to discuss issues, to learn firsthand, you know, what I've learned in my experience is many times when I say we, the police department may think we know what the issue is, but if you actually spend a little bit of time with the community members, it may not be a crime or a traffic issue, it's a quality of life issue. That's what they're looking for. But again, you have to have that communication and open communication. National Night Out, I think every agency should participate in that. National Night Out is the one night that we should all come together as a community to celebrate essentially taking the bite out of crime. But it's also another opportunity for not only for the police department to be out there, but we are also encouraging our neighbors and our community members to get out there and know one another. You know, law enforcement, it's nice to think that we're the ones who actually solve all the crimes. We're not doing it. Most of the major crimes that we solved, 99% of them, were because the citizens got involved, were a witness for us, they called 911, they reported it and gave us the information to allow us to solve that crime.
It looks like I don't have any additional questions this go around yet, but what I'll do is cycle back through some of the previous questions we've had. Lynn asked if Temple appears to be growing pretty rapidly and has a major interstate running through the center of it. How do you plan to work with city officials and city management to ensure that the needs of the police department are met with both staffing and infrastructure?
So as I responded to it, that was actually one of the questions, pre-questions they talked about, or I hit on also in part of my paperwork for my packet that I turned in. Not only do you have the I-35 corridor, you have the I-14 corridor coming through. So it's imperative that we work as a group. City manager, you look at your staffing needs, what resources will you need to handle that traffic? Will it have an impact? You're going to have to, again, work with TxDOT to see what their plans are. How's it going to impact our traffic? Do we believe traffic will increase? Will it relieve traffic by actually opening up the interstate and completing the construction that's going on? But staffing is certainly you look at more than just for simply traffic, but also calls for service, expansion for a number of residences that are being built. You want to build a plan and have a downrange plan, 5-year plan to understand this is where we're at. This is our build out in 5 years. This is to maintain our core services and the number of officers that we're going to need. You know, how many accidents are occurring on the interstate in the city? So it's more than just looking at the interstate.
All right. And Dr. Vexler had asked if you could please answer the question, are you bilingual, 1? And then 2, can you talk a little bit about your views on cross-cultural and diversity issues and how you help address those in the department?
The answer is no, I'm not bilingual. I know enough to get me by. My daughter, who we have adopted, a little girl, she'll be 9 in July. She is bilingual. We've put her in a Spanish-speaking class and a bilingual school, science and arts school, and one of the languages they teach there is Spanish. So she actually knows far more Spanish than I do. But diversity for the aspect of the police department, you know, it's imperative that a police department is reflective of the community they serve. You don't have to have exact numbers, but I think it is a dangerous path to go down when, argument's sake, if you have 98% white males in your department and you have a diversity of 15% African-American males, 26% Hispanic, 54% white, and then Asian and Pacific, round that out, but you need to be reflective of the community you serve. It's imperative that you work on that, and it should be discussed all the time with your recruiting and your leadership team to ensure that you're recruiting. And it's not just for recruiting, but it's also moving up through the ranks of the department to ensure that it's reflective throughout the department at all levels, race and gender.
Gary Teston asked what emphasis you would place on employee development.
You know, I think employee development is important. It's, you know, there's a saying that, you know, basically you train your people where they want to, they're capable of moving on and leaving, but you treat them so well that they don't want to, they want to remain. Training is imperative for any effective professional organization. You have to invest in not only your commissioned personnel, but your non-commissioned, your professional staff personnel. It's essential. Training does cost time and money. However, the return on the investment is having such a workforce that you're going to increase your productivity. You're going to probably increase your ability for people not calling in sick, people that are not happy, reduce stress, but training is imperative. If you don't give them the training to do the job and their expectations, that's really unfair to them. But training is very important for all people at all levels.
Thank you for that answer. Let's see, we'll do one or two more questions here. Jeremy Patel asked if you would consider changing the current 12-hour shift, or what your thoughts are on a 12-hour shift.
You know, from a personal perspective, I'm not a person that's in favor of 12 hours. I think if you look at studies, 10-hour shifts are probably the one shift that when you start exceeding 10 hours, that the 12 hours is when officers start having more accidents and lack of attention. But that's a personal opinion. But the bigger issue is it working for Temple PD? What do the officers want? And are we able to deliver an operational aspect of our core services effectively and ensuring that we have staffing out there? I'm on board with a 12-hour shift if that's what the community wants and what the officers want.
All right, we have a question now from Stephen Patterson. You touched a little bit on this during our main portion when we talked about school resource officers, but Stephen says, with the ever increasing shootings in our schools, stores, and community, what recommendations do you have to help control these types of shootings?
Well, my recommendations is that it's not just a police issue, it's a school district issue. Everything that we do should be done hand in hand with all the multiple school districts that were within Temple. You know, you need to have SROs that are properly trained. You know, I spoke briefly earlier about a black eye for law enforcement was when Columbine occurred. Officers did what they were trained to do. Unfortunately, they thought that was a SWAT incident. We have learned now that active shooters are not a SWAT incident. It's an active shooter demands a completely different response. But to give that, be capable of having that response means you have to have training and the tools. Do our SROs have carbines? Have we provided training to the school district? Do we do walkthroughs and look at any type of input with the school district when they build a new building for lockdown procedures? Do we ensure that they're doing their best practices? Is there all the doors on the perimeter locked down at all times? There's only one entrance. Do officers have access to those doors in case of an emergency? So it's important that we work hand in hand with the school district. I think SROs play a significant role. They need to be trained and they need to have specialized equipment, not only just with weapons, but the training, vests, helmets, safety equipment to make sure that they're able to respond if we do have a critical incident at the school.
We've got time for maybe one more question. It looks like Ms. Lariv has raised her hand again.
Hello, Mr. Lowry. I have another question for you that's more of a complex question. Do you know and understand the silent signs of PTSD with police officers in the police department? How will you handle this PTSD? And will you offer peer support to the police officers?
Well, one of the pillars for 21st century policing, the sixth pillar, is officer wellness and safety. There are silent signs for PTSD. I'm not going to tell you I'm a specialist in that. There are signs for it. Unfortunately, for law enforcement, and Texas is one of the leading states, and that's not a proud thing to tell you. You know, law enforcement suicides have now started succumbing the number of officers killed under violent acts on an annual basis, and Texas is one of those states that usually leads that. So you need to have training on only a psychologists or psychiatrists can diagnose you with PTSD, but it is something that is serious that we need to be talking about. We should always have debriefings for critical incidents, officer wellness and welfare. It was taboo and has been taboo. We need to demystify this aspect that, you know, for an officer to say they need help, we got to get away from that. In Arlington, we just implemented what we call the blue chip program. Every officer is issued a blue chip where the APD logo. And essentially what that does is we have identified 10 to 12 different resources for them, for psychologists and psychiatrists, where they can show up, they present their blue chip, and the city pays the bill, doesn't ask any questions. The only time that the city is informed of something is if what is being said where that officer is a danger to themselves or others. You know, we need to move away from immediately removing a weapon from an officer. That even makes it more difficult to get officers to come forward when they're having problems. I think for the most part, if people were honest, a lot of us have difficulty seeing the amount of trauma that we see. We just don't like to share it, and people handle stress different ways. And if you're lucky that you haven't had significant issues, you're just one of the lucky ones. But we have opportunities and a duty to protect those people who see these critical incidents and experience these critical incidents. And the fact that what an officer sees in 5 years, the average officer sees in 5 years, far exceeds what the average person sees in a lifetime, sometimes 2- and 3-fold. So it's important to have effective peer support and resources available for not only police officers, but all people of the police department, and maybe even for some of our community members through victim services to provide them resources. It's a different avenue of services, but we need to be looking out for everybody.
We've got one more question we'll go to tonight. We appreciate your time and answers here. Thomas Plock has asked, he says that I hear what we need to get the schools and the family involved to help curb youth crimes. What specifically will you do to make that happen, and how will you facilitate those changes?
Well, I think it's important we realize that we have to invest in our youth. Our youth is certainly our future. So how do we get the importance of letting somebody know that is young? We all made bad decisions when we were young, but sometimes our youth are making decisions where there's no point of recovery when they try to get a job later down the road, because they're disqualified because of something they did when they were 15 or 16, you know, decision making. I think the opportunities that need to be working on is we need to be involved in our schools more than just the SROs. So a program that I'm involved in and we use in Arlington is Coach 5-0. I actually have one of the high schools that I deal with is we actually show up, and you got to break the ice. Show them that you're there to trust and build relationships, that you're involved and you're concerned with them. You got to be genuine when you're dealing with our youth, or you're going to lose them. You need to show that you're out there, you care about them. You showing up at events outside on the weekend, outside of your regular hours, you're involved, that you're there as a mentor for them and as a resource if they need to call somebody. You know, we need to look at things that keep our youth involved for after school activities. We've worked with our faith-based communities to open one of their churches where they actually not only opened the church and allowed basketball to occur after school, but they provided snacks for them till 6 o'clock. And they had a little competition from different teams. We were successful in reducing crime and reducing youth crime in there. I'm not one that's necessarily in favor of a curfew. You know, most of the juvenile crime, if you look at it statistically, occurs during the day. But, you know, the bottom line is when you have an egregious crime committed by a juvenile, a youth, you need to address the crime, and it's disheartening, and sometimes it takes away opportunities for them down the road because they made a bad decision and they didn't have an opportunity to talk to somebody or have a mentor to help them make those decisions.
We thank you for your time tonight, Mr. Lowry. We want to thank our staff again, and our community members that participated in this event. To all those who have logged in through the webinar, again, you should receive an email with a survey link, and that link will allow you to give your feedback on any or all of the candidates. We thank you for your time. We thank you for your participation, and we wish everyone a good night.
I appreciate everybody also joining us tonight. Thank you for the opportunity.